A Story of a Fruit Farm. Chapter 1. Background, Boyhood. Located in the Niagara Peninsula and being part of Lot 17 Concession 3 of Saltfleet Township in the county of Wentworth, this small farm had all the advantages of Ontario's finest weather, plus the advantage of being located closely enough to Hamilton to afford a good market for the produce. It proved to be within the development area of Hamilton suburbs and was sold in 1972 for that purpose. My grandfather, Charles W. DeWitt, purchased the farm in 1900 and moved from his farm at Tapleytown and became a fruit grower. He sold Massey Harris farm implements and mutual fire insurance. Indications are that he was a better salesman than grower. A real gentleman and highly respected, he was noted for never having kept a record book of either business. Nobody will ever know how successful he actually was or how many people neglected to pay for value received. He was always proud to own a good horse, but had no respect whatsoever for an automobile. He never learned to drive properly, and in his later years had utter disregard for stop streets, railways, or traffic. He burned a complete set of bands out on the old Model T every time he went up to the mountain. On several occasions he fell asleep at the wheel, crossed a ditch, a railway track, and back on the road without mishap. Never really had a serious accident in his life. In 1902, he bought an 8-acre farm right next to this farm, separated from it by DeWitt Road, and gave it to my father, Frederick W. DeWitt, as a wedding present when he married my mother, Georgina Albadine Stewart. In 1908, my sister, Beatrice, was born, and 2 years later my sister Mabel, who died the following year. Beatrice died in 1920 of polio. I was born in 1915. My memories of Beatrice are vague, but I can remember following the rules of going twice to her hiding place when playing hide-and-go-seek. In 1912, Dad started as a Ford dealer and operated out of an old barn behind the house. 2 years later, he built a new dealership and garage on No. 8 Highway in front of the house. The business flourished. He achieved some inviolable records, having sold the top number of cars and tractors for all dealers in Ontario one year. His staff included 5 mechanics, 1 stockman, 2 salesmen, and 2 bookkeepers. Mother told the story of the first car Dad brought home from Toronto. As he made the corner off No. 8, Mother watched through the front window of the house. He was so excited and enthusiastic that he ran into the corner of the house instead of stopping in the backyard. I never heard about the damage. Whenever I meet older men and introduce myself, the first greeting I get is, "I bought my first car from your dad." I am proud to say that not one person I have talked to has ever said he got a poor deal or was dissatisfied. Grandmother, grandfather, and Dad all died within a year. Grandmother being 74 in 1926, grandfather 77 in the fall of 1927, and Dad 45 in that same year. This left Mother with 2 farms and a big business plus a 12-year-old son, me. She sold the small farm and the business and moved across the road to the big brick house. Unfortunately, Dad had squandered most of the money, having died as an alcoholic and with a liver disease. There were debts galore and a mortgage on this farm. Mother tried to operate the farm in 1928, and with all the problems in the world, no money, no equipment, no farming ability, and too soft-hearted to be a good businesswoman. That fall, she sold the farm to Mr. James Kay and Fred Graisley, who already owned the Ford dealership and Dad's garage. Mother retained the right to remain in the house and pay rent. 1929, bang, the biggest depression the world has ever known. Kay and Graisley were unable to make any of the payments on the farm, and the taxes piled up as years passed. Mother turned the house into a tourist home and managed to survive and feed me. Mother's 2 sisters, Aunt Nell and Aunt May, moved in with us, and they split the cost of living. During my last few years in school, to keep eats on the table, Mother boarded 2 school teachers, Bill Johnson and Connie Shepherd, and Bill's brother Elwood. They became very good friends, and Bill was my best man at our wedding. Bill, Elwood, Harry Greenwood, a neighbor, and myself sang as a quartet in Fruitland United Church and once in Stony Creek United Church. I made many trips with Bill to his home in Arkona and enjoyed each one. Lib and I included their home in our honeymoon trip. During the same period, Don Wright and his 3 brothers had a dance orchestra which played at the Terrace Dance Hall on the northwest corner of the farm. They boarded at our home while the regular boarders were on their school summer holidays. Don was a real genius with music, and he could play piano, violin, and a beautiful trumpet. He made all the arrangements and copied the style of Guy Lombardo, having come from the same city, London, Ontario. Don later became professor of music at Western University. He could see I was interested in music and undertook to teach me how to form chords and how to use them. Up to that point, I had played for the kids to dance in the hall at Saltfleet High School at noon, recess, and rainy days. Askew played drums and Howard Ranke played trumpet. Sometimes Isabel Bigger spelled me off. The high school was a bare 6 rooms and no gym or assembly hall. Don straightened out a lot of my mistakes, and my music improved greatly considering what a short time he had to teach me. I even composed a few ballads, which never amounted to a darn thing. Going back to my childhood, I would say that it was filled with rich experiences. In public school at Fruitland, Ralph Hill, Jim Douglas, Harris Askew, and myself formed a friendship that has lasted to this present time. We were seldom apart and shared many good times. I had the first bicycle, so until the others got theirs, we rode double with the other 2 running beside. Dad was most generous in all respects and often went against Mother's wishes to give me things in advance of my age, like a .22 rifle at 9, the use of a second-hand car at 10 in which to drive all over the farm. I took the head off the engine once and was not enough of a mechanic to put it back. Dad had one of his mechanics replace it and advised me to ask for help before trying something like that again. After Dad died, it was most difficult to adjust to poverty, especially for Mother. The 4 of us fellows went to Saltfleet High School, and about the second year we dug a 1923 Model T Ford touring car out of a pile of junk in Mr. Hill's barn. It had not been used in several years and needed much repair work. We named it Susie and drove it to school for the remainder of our school days. That is, on the good weather days. We made one trip to 5 miles north of Huntsville in the summer of 1931. Our mothers loaded the car with groceries like you would never believe. My mother baked a fresh cherry pie, which was upside down by the time we got to Burlington. Every bit of juice trickled down through our clothes and whatever else was under it. We took a pinion gear for the rear end and a connecting rod as spare parts, and those were the only 2 parts required to keep us mobile. The first long hill outside of Aurelia gave us the first flat tire, so we camped in the bush, by a stream not too far from the road. That night a thunderstorm spoiled the milk and wet most of the groceries. In the morning we were all up except Askew, so we carried him to the stream and threw him in. He was an excellent swimmer, so we hung on to the bottom and played dead. We all went in after him, clothes and all. It took 3 days to forgive him. Later the rod went, so we parked where we were, drained the oil in a cooking pot, replaced the connecting rod, and drove on. We did most of our driving at night to help protect the tires from the hot road. Our total assets for the trip were about $15, so by now they are a little short. On the return trip, we had about 28 flat tires and a broken rear end. We used the 3 spare tires in every conceivable way, on top of each other, full of grass, or just plain flat. At Brampton, we stopped for the first time at a service station and pumped up the tires with the air hose and went the rest of the distance without mishap. Arriving home at about 4:30 a.m. and slept for 2 days. We all acquired cars within the next year. We called them bugs because they were only the bare chases of Model T Fords. I paid $5 for mine, and the others were comparable. No licenses for the first year, so our travel was restricted to the farm and fairly regular trips down to the Dean farm, where Mr. Harry Bigger had his half-mile dirt track to train his horses. Lloyd Dean had the fastest bug and made the circle in 45 seconds. I came next with 48, and the others went as high as 60. Howard Pagent blew a tire on the corner and turned end over end to finish with his bug, nose down, leaning against a telephone pole, his last trip. Del Pierre tried his Model A sedan and made it in 52 seconds. I built a racer body on mine, called it Ignatz, and with a license, drove it for several years. Ralph kept Susie, and Harris built a bug and named it Elmer. We rarely went anywhere together with Elmer that we did not run out of gas, because Harry absolutely refused to buy more than 1 gallon at a time. The test of fitness was to prove the car would make the mountains at high gear. Askew would claim to do it, but when I rode with him he could never make it. I suppose the added weight did not help. On the return trip once, just as we were at the bottom of the hill, Askew hit a small stone on the road and lost control. We left the road on the left side, and for several seconds it was impossible to tell which side of the real healthy hydropole he intended going. At the last second he managed to miss it on the left side, which put us well into the apple orchard on plowed ground. I think we must have touched the ground at least 15 feet of forward travel. The hood went over our heads the first bump, and every loose item followed later. We finally got back on the road 300 yards later, and the wrenches I was holding must still have finger imprints from them being squeezed so tight. Another close one. Let's go back a little to 1928, when the McBride family bought the small farm. I went to school until 1933, but was never a scholar, so every fruit season found all those who could find work picking fruit. This included the McBride girl, Libby. The 5'2", redhead, 98-pound doll I carted around and moved ladders for, that hooked me real good. By 1935 we were real serious, without a hope of matrimony. Her family was as bad off financially as mine. When Lib was working at Eaton's as saleslady in lingerie, I often picked her up at the store on James Street, in Ignatz, with no windshield. The first requirement was a helmet to keep her hair out of her eyes. Nearly sideswiped a car, but made it home without getting caught. Ticked both sides of the bug's hubcaps once while trying to beat a streetcar which was about to pass a horse-drawn bread wagon. That was as close as I ever came to a serious accident. Acceleration was not that great, even considering a total weight of about 600 pounds. To explain a little better, streetcars traveled in the middle of the street. One passed the electric-driven streetcar on its right-hand side. There was about a foot of clearance on each side of your car between the streetcar and the parked automobiles. Top speed for the streetcar was about 25 miles per hour and the bread wagon about 6 miles per hour. The trick was to judge distances. It was necessary to pass the streetcar and swing in front of it before getting to the bread wagon. Model Ts were equipped with rear brakes only, consequently a long stopping distance. This meant that once committed, the only hope was to accelerate faster than the streetcar. I guess I called it a little close. Bert and Bill Metcalf, Lib's nephews from Detroit, spent every summer at the McBrides from the time that they were 2 years old until they were 12. Those kids were closer than 5 minutes to 11 and shadowed Lib and I pretty close. Most of the time, they were a real pleasure. I accidentally ran over Bert's foot with the rear wheel of Ignatz, which failed to bring even a tear. Bill cried really hard because I refused to run over his foot too. I called them Willie and Squirt until after Lib and I were married, at which time they made a deal that if they called us Aunt Libby and Uncle Cliff, we would call them Bert and Bill. As time passed, the 10-year age gap grew smaller, and we have had many good times sharing each other's problems. In 1935, the farm was put up for public auction, and with the help of the lawyer, now Judge Sweet, and my Uncle Stanley Stewart, Mother bid $14,000 of the government's money and an agreement to postpone payment of back taxes for several years. The mortgage was amortized for 20 years. Looking back, the whole deal was a mess. We still had no money. The equipment included an old worn tractor disc and 3 furrow plugs Dad had used as demonstrators, a 1923 Fordsman tractor, a 1929 Model A Ford truck, a few hand tools, and a few horse-drawn implements, such as a grape hoe and a cultivator. The total value as junk would not be more than $500. Probably the worst aspect of the whole thing was the condition of the farm itself. The only crop that had had any attention in 4 years was the grapes. 1934 was a severe winter, and with no resistance left, there were dead trees all over the farm. The survivors were not pruned, were weak and full of disease and insects. Hand this over to a 20-year-old kid with absolutely no knowledge of farming, and all that is left is the abounded ambition of youth. Labor was 15 cents an hour, but without the 14 cents, we did what we could do ourselves and let the rest go. Everyone worked at least 10 hours a day for 6 days a week. The year ended with a $500 loss and a lot of experience. I cannot recall the price of the team of horses, but I dug the spray outfit, a piece at a time, out of the junk pile in the corner of the barn. I'll tell you it was a dandy. End of Chapter 1.